Good morning once again, everyone. Our lesson from this morning will be taken from John's Gospel, so if you'd like to turn there, we'll be reading in chapter 13. As we've been going through the book that we've been doing for our Sunday school class, Lord, Sometimes I Don't Feel Saved, the lessons that we have been drawing from that for our practice of our Christian life ourselves have been drawn from John's teaching about Jesus' example. And I would like to spend some of our time this morning looking more at Jesus' example directly from John's Gospel. The scene we're going to be in here in chapter 13 are Jesus' last times with his apostles. The Lord's Supper, as we call it, that final Passover that he ate with them before he was crucified, and then would be raised back to life in 3 days, and then start eating with them all over again, including by the seaside when he met his apostles on the boat there. But this is significant for us because it establishes the scene in which we get our communion that we partake of every week, and it also sets up some of the sort of crucial moments that lead up to Jesus' death. However, what we'll be looking at today is the last act of service Jesus did before his greatest act of service. The most important example of Jesus showing that agape love we were talking about in class this morning, that love of priority where you place one above yourself, that was ultimately fulfilled in his death on the cross. But this sort of penultimate act of sacrifice, this moment before that, is equally important. Let's start at the beginning of chapter 13 of John's Gospel and read what the apostle says there. Now before the feast of the Passover, Jesus, knowing that his hour had come, and that he would depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in this world, he loved them to the end. During the supper, the devil having already put it in the heart of Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come forth from God and was going back to God, got up from the supper, laid aside his garments, and taking a towel, he girded himself. Then he poured water into the basin and began to wash the disciples' feet, and to wipe them with the towel with which he was girded. So Jesus begins a task here that is reflective of his humility and his service to his own students. The importance of this is easy to sort of override in this time because indeed it does seem like a deep display of love and care for these men. But more than that, this action was only provided for people at homes that had slaves. If you went to an ordinary person's home, someone who was just your friend, who probably didn't have any servants or slaves of any kind, they were just, of average income, maybe had a trade or something they worked on, they would provide you with a bowl and a towel and kindly let you wash your own feet as a way of greeting you at the door, saying, come on in, you're dusty from the road, let's make you comfortable so you can sit at the couch with everybody else and eat. And because they reclined at the floor and ate at low tables, having somebody's foot pretty near to your head was not that uncommon. So not only was it a courtesy for the person that was coming to visit your house, but it was also nice for you because you didn't have to look at somebody's dirty feet while you were eating. But Jesus didn't just give the apostles a bowl of water. He didn't just hand them a towel and say, all right guys, let's get ready to eat. When the apostles were all assembled in this room, he dressed himself in the towel that he was going to clean their feet with, carried the bowl himself, and got down in front of them at foot level and washed their feet. There is absolutely no dignified way to do this. You cannot make yourself look important while you've got somebody's dirty feet in your hands and you're wiping their feet with the towel that you're wearing around your waist. There is no way for you to be high and mighty and lord over people while you're knelt down with somebody's foot in your hand. That is the ultimate position of humility and of putting yourself in a servant position. And Jesus demonstrated that right away. But rather than simply be grateful, as the other apostles were, Peter had to open his mouth. Now, this is one of those times where we can all kind of relate to Peter. Peter was not just talking to hear himself talk. He, like other times, was thinking he was about to say the right thing. Jesus is not good enough to just do. I also need, or whatever else it was. You remember later on, when they're at the Transfiguration on the Mount, in another passage of Scripture, oh, it's good that we're here, Jesus. I'll build a tabernacle for you and for Elijah and for Moses, and then he didn't have anywhere to go after that, but he was just ready to go. He was ready to do something. Something had to be done. And so he started talking. And Peter's about to demonstrate that quality of his character here. In verse 5, he poured the water into the basin. He began to wash the disciples' feet and wipe them with the towel with which he was girded. So he came to Simon Peter. He said to him, Lord, do you wash my feet? Jesus answered and said to him, what I do, you do not realize now, but you will understand hereafter. Peter said to him, never shall you wash my feet. Oh, it's Jesus, stand up. You're the master, I'm the student. You don't do this kind of thing. I'm the one who ought to be, I'll wash my own feet, Jesus. You just let me take care of it. But Jesus says, if I do not wash you, you have no part with me. Okay, well, obviously this is important. What should I say next? I know. Simon Peter said to him, Lord, then wash not only my feet, but also my hands and my head. Well, if it's so important, Jesus, well, don't stop there. Get started, and you can wash the rest of me while you're at it. It says washing is obviously something significant. Let's just do the whole thing. But Jesus said to him, he who has bathed needs only to wash his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not all of you. And that was the word y'all there, not all of y'all. For he knew the one who was betraying him. For this reason he said, not all of you are clean. Now, Peter's attitude here, once again, is not ill-intentioned. He really thinks he's doing something good. He really thinks he's going to honor Jesus by saying, oh, well, don't wash my feet at all. And then when Jesus says, I must, Peter says, well, then make sure you're not missing anything. Jesus, go ahead and wash my hands and my head as well. He's saying, if this is such an important thing, let's do it right. Let's do all of it. But the whole point of what Jesus was doing was demonstrating the way in which he wanted his apostles to treat one another. He was teaching them a lesson about not only the humility that he was able and willing to demonstrate, but the example he was setting for the rest of them. In verse 12 it says this, when he had washed their feet and taken his garments and reclined at the table again, he said to them, do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you're right, for so I am. If I then, the Lord and teacher, wash your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I gave you as an example that you should also do as I do to you. Truly, truly, I say to you, a slave is not greater than his master, nor is one who is sent greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them. I do not speak to all of you. I know the ones I have chosen, but it is that the scripture may be fulfilled. He who eats my bread has lifted up his heel against me. From now on, I am telling you before it comes to pass, that when it does occur, you may believe that I am he. Truly, truly, I say to you, he who receives whomever I send receives me, and he who receives me receives him who sent me. Verse 18 quotes scripture there and says, he who eats my bread has lifted up his heel against me. Jesus went around lifting up all their heels, very literally. He went around providing for them a great service and honor. But in that, there was also a dishonor that was coming. The heel that has been raised here is one to strike him. And Judas has already prepared in his heart to betray Jesus. The scheme has already been set. Let's look at that passage that we just read. In our minds, think about what we've read. Did Jesus skip Judas? Did Jesus neglect to serve him and wash his feet like he did the others? No. All 12 of those men in that room with Jesus got their feet washed, including the one who had already decided to raise his heel against Jesus and strike him with that foot rather than have it be washed by him. The service that Jesus provided, the example that he set forth, was not only to those who were on his side. It was not only to those who had chosen to be with him, be faithful to him, and do what he wanted them to do. Jesus humbled himself towards the people who had decided that they wanted to destroy him as well. That is the example that's being set here. It would be far too easy a lesson to take, although it's already difficult, to have Jesus say, be nice to each other, do things for each other that you wouldn't want to do to for anyone. I don't know about you. I'm glad that this is more symbolic than it is literal, because I prefer not to have to wash all of their feet if I can manage it. I went to a youth rally once where that was part of the exercise. If there was an elder in the building, one of the youth group members was supposed to take the elder from their group, sit him on a chair and wash his feet, and show this example. But they got it backwards. I mean, I know it's nice to show respect to the elder, but if they're following Jesus' example, it ought to have been the elders who were washing the students' feet at that youth rally. Because that's what it was. It was the greater humbling himself to the lesser. Jesus, their God and Master, their great teacher whom they love so much, was serving his students, mere mortals, men. And that's the example. There was no longer any discrimination between who deserves this treatment. There was no longer any discrimination against who it deserves to have to give it. But the one who humbled himself was the one who ought to have been being served by all rights. He gave up rights in order to do what was right. He put aside what he should have been able to insist on in order to set a demonstration of what he wanted them to do. If we're looking in the continuing verses here, we're going to see more about Judas' betrayal and just how close to Jesus' heart this was. Verse 21 says this, when Jesus had said this, remember he just got finished saying, whoever receives me receives the one who sent me. If you accept me, you have to accept God too. When Jesus had said this, he became troubled in spirit and testified and said, truly, truly, I say to you, that one of you will betray me. The disciples began looking at one another, at a loss to know which one he was speaking. There was, reclining on Jesus' bosom, one of his disciples whom Jesus loved. So Simon Peter gestured to him and said to him, tell us who it is of whom he is speaking. He, leaning back thus on Jesus' bosom, said to him, Lord, who is it? Jesus then answered, that is the one for whom I shall dip the morsel and give it to him. So when he had dipped the morsel, he took it and gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. And after the morsel, Satan had entered him. Therefore Jesus said to him, what you do, do quickly. Now no one of them, those reclining at the table, knew what purpose he had said this to him. For some of them were supposing, because Judas had the money box, that Jesus was saying to him, buy the things we have need of for the feast, or else that he shall give something to the poor. So after receiving the morsel, he went out immediately, and it was met. Jesus was sitting close enough to Judas at that table that he could hand him a piece of food. This was no, sort of distant social gathering. These people were intimately close with one another. So much so that in the style of sitting to which they were accustomed, John was basically sitting in front of Jesus, reclined, and he could lean back and talk to Jesus in his ear because they were kind of overlapping each other. It's a little bit awkward to imagine spending any time with even your closest friends like that in our social sensibilities, especially after COVID. 6 feet. But we've got a scene here in which Jesus is very close with these men. He spent years traveling with them and teaching. But now we've got this moment where someone who they've been with for this whole time is now foretold by Jesus to betray him. And yet at the same time, when Judas goes out to do what he was purposed to do, none of them recognized what was happening. In verse 31 it says, "Therefore when he had gone out," referring to Judas, "Jesus said, 'Now is the Son of Man glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and will glorify him immediately. Little children, I am with you a little while longer. You will seek me, and as I said to the Jews, now I also say to you, where I am going, you cannot come. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another, even as I have loved you, that you also love one another. By this all men will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another.'" Here comes that word love that we were talking about, the love of priority, the agape love. This is not merely have affection for one another. This is place people in priority higher than yourselves. And what better example could Jesus have given in this moment but to have washed the feet of his enemy in their presence? When Jesus told Peter, "You don't understand this right now, but you will," Peter was going to find out really soon who Judas was. So much so Peter would draw his sword and strike someone in that moment. He knew what that meant when he saw the betrayal happening. So this moment where Jesus has humbled himself will add to that meaning even to those men in just a few hours from this point. So when Jesus says in verse 31, "Now is the Son of Man glorified," here's one of those times where I'm going to use the Greek knowledge for you. The tense that's being used here is the aorist tense. The aorist tense is a past tense that is used for something that is seen from the big picture. It is sort of like if you were thinking of the past tense not as a point on a line, but zooming out and seeing both ends, the beginning and the end. So when Jesus has said, "Now is the Son of Man glorified," he's saying the glorification of the Son of Man has become complete. Now that's a little clunky to say, so that's why your translation didn't say that. But that's the idea behind the tense that has been put there. It's a big picture perspective. But what is the now? What is the point at which Jesus says, "Now is the Son of Man glorified"? It is when Judas leaves to betray him. That is the point at which Jesus' glorification has become complete. That process has already finished because it has already begun. God will make it so. And that's the perspective that Jesus is putting here. Verse 36, Peter says, "Simon Peter said to him, 'Lord, where are you going?' Jesus answered, 'Where I go you cannot follow me now, but you will follow later.' Peter said to him, 'Lord, why can I not follow you right now? I will lay down my life for you.' Jesus answered, 'Will you lay down your life for me? Truly, truly, I say to you, a rooster will not crow until you deny me 3 times. Do not let your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many dwelling places. If it were not so, I would have told you. For I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, you may be also, and you know the way where I am going.'" There's more to this story that I'd like to continue, and I think we'll do that next week. But I want to look again at verse 34. "By this all men will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." If you have agape for one another, if you prioritize other people above yourselves. This commandment, or the sort of prototype to it, is not new. This commandment was already made in Leviticus chapter 19 and verse 18. You are supposed to love your neighbor as yourself. The new command was not only that they should now love each other in a way where their neighbor, their brother, the ones who they are being commanded to love here are loved more than as themselves, but also they're to be loved as Jesus loved them. It's unconditional, selfless, godly love that is required of every believer for every believer. That is the pattern that Jesus has set out here. No exceptions. The problem with this for modern Christians is we have no trouble asking for this kind of love for ourselves. We have a lot of trouble giving it to others. We need to be humble like Jesus and be able to take on the service that is set in front of us to do what God has required of us. And that sometimes will mean that we have to serve our enemies. So if this lesson has been beneficial for you today, and you haven't already become part of God's kingdom by joining His gospel, obeying His gospel through baptism, we invite you to come forward and partake in that. We have that opportunity for you here. But if you need prayers of the church for encouragement, you need to be restored because you've fallen away, we offer that time now as well as we stand and sing.